Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. For over a decade, Libya has had little peace since a NATO-backed uprising overthrew longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. The power vacuum left behind divided the oil-rich North African country into warring eastern and western factions. After a ceasefire ended a civil war in 2020, attempts at finding a political solution have failed at every step. And the past weeks have seen tensions rise, which have increased fears of a return to violence. The UN warns that without a unified government and elections, there will be greater instability. Last week, the Libyan parliament officially unrecognized the UN-supported Tripoli-based government and the country's Presidency Council. This prompted the council to fire Libya's influential central bank governor, who oversees how the country's oil riches are spent. A move which has been criticized as illegitimate. Tensions further increased after the eastern government fully halted production at Libya's largest oil field early this month. Egypt and Turkiye, which support opposing sides in Libya, are watching the situation unfold amid their own political rapprochement that has seen rapid gains over the past year. And to discuss the latest developments in Libya, joining me now from Istanbul is Vehbi Baysan. He is an associate professor at İbn Haldun University, and from Bursa, Turkey, Ferhat Polat, a researcher at TRT World Research Center. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Ferhat, could you walk us through what's been happening in Libya and what's the political situation like there now?
There is a power struggle in Libya have been simmering for over a decade, and we are now seeing the long-standing tensions re-emerge in a very concerning way. The fundamental problem is that there are so many different factions in terms of military factions, and on top of that, foreign fighters, mercenaries, and two different governments, one based in Tripoli, which is internationally recognized government, and another one is based in the eastern part of the country and supported by Khalifa Haftar and Tobruk-based parliament, which is parallel government. And these two governments, they have not been able to reach a long-lasting political settlement. Yes. And in 2020, they reached a ceasefire agreement, and which is supposed to take Libya to hold elections, which has been for many Libyans will, and that hasn't happened yet. And instead, political maneuvering has increased. And the recent tension also, it's another political dispute.
We will continue, but Vehbi, I want to hear what you're thinking about the latest developments in the country. Are long simmering power struggles re-emerging and raising fears of a broader escalation?
Well, it is quite a concern, because when we look at the international observers, they always express this view, because it was already fragile peace agreement between East and West. And last week, the IT specialist from the central bank had been kidnapped. And as a result, the same day or probably the next day, central bank announced seizing all their activities, which is paralyzing the whole banking system in the country. And now we have this official statement from the government, Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh, saying he removed the central bank governor, which is quite concerning, because that may lead to a violent and even a civil war.
It's interesting, central bank, because there are reports now, central bank evacuates staff due to security situation amid a management crisis, as you've mentioned, as the current governor, Siddiq Kabir, refuses to hand over the Presidential Council appointed governor, Mohammed Shukri. So what's the latest there? What's been happening with the country's central bank, Ferhat?
I think it seems that the Presidential Council decision was an attempt to impose the Tripoli-based government's full control over the Central Bank of Libya, possibly as a counterweight to the eastern region's control of Libya's oil fields and terminals. And it is important to remember that large majority of oil fields based in eastern part of the country, and sometimes Khalifa Haftar and his militia forces, they cut off the and blockade the oil fields, used as a tool to impose. And I think central bank, the central bank controls Libya's vital oil resources, and there are lifeblood of the economy, making crucial prize for the competing political networks vying for control of the state. And the central bank is one of the main key institution in Libya, and alongside with National Oil Corporation, which is essential for Libya's economy. Libya's economy pretty much relies on oil revenue. So if there is any disruption on central bank, that's caused huge, devastating consequences for ordinary Libyans.
So, Vepi, how do you think will international financial institutions respond to this turmoil, and how will that impact, as Ferhat mentioned, Libya's already ailing economy?
Well, let's remember that central bank has a pivotal role bridging between East and West, and the oil revenues transferred into civil servants' salaries in Libya. Basically, it's like a heart or the brain of Libya or Libyan economy. Now, I just mentioned that the IT specialists from central bank had been kidnapped a few days ago, but a week earlier than that, there was a raid. Armed man, we don't know who they are, quote unquote, raided the central bank, forcing resignation of the governor. But now we have a new candidate, and but the financial markets, certainly the Western governments, will not immediately respond favorably to this forceful change in Libya. Therefore, we have to wait and see. But the concern is that in a short term, whether or not Libya would go back again, the spiral violence, which actually caused the death of many civilians and Libyans in the country.
So, Ferhat, prior to the central bank crisis, the Libyan parliament unanimously voted to end the term of the GNU and its Prime Minister Dabaiba. What's been happening on that front, and where does warlord Khalifa Haftar stand amid this turmoil?
I believe this is not such a coincidence. I think all has been planned for a long time, and the decision was rejected by Abdulhamid Dibeiba, and is not being supported also by international community, and has also not recognized the parliament's move and continues to back the GNU as a legitimate government. The situation remains volatile, and with potential of increased conflict with rival authorities in the East and West if they don't resolve the political impasse through dialogue and compromise. And also, it is imperative to note that Khalifa Haftar has been mobilizing some of his forces southwest of Libya, nearby the Algerian border, and they try to, I think there's one strategically important location in this location, and he wants to control. Then there is a speculation he wants to have another offensive against the internationally recognized government of Tripoli.
So, Vepi, how do you think, Cairo viewing all these developments, and why have tensions flared once again between Tripoli and Cairo?
Well, we know that Egypt, in many occasions, in the international arena, expressed their view that they're not happy with the solution. They seem to be more backing the Eastern government, this is to say Khalifa Haftar's, and given the fact that Benghazi area where Haftar comes from and controlling closer to Egypt. But I think Egypt's role here would be extremely important, and they should work for a peaceful solution to these kind of crises, and not really letting the country going back into a civil war, because we know that it happened in the past, and we know that many tribes that were not happy at the time of Gaddafi, now they're not happy with the solutions the international community presenting to them, and they feel that actually their wishes undermined, their ideology or presence in the country had been undermined in many occasions. So it's very fragile, very frightening. But actually, I'm not sure also if Dibeiba is going to back off from this decision, because the governor is saying that they exceeded their legitimacy, they exceeded their authority, and in terms of issuing a decree to sack him. But it seems that it's very, very serious situation, and Egypt and Turkey, that Turkey's role is also very important, working towards a peaceful solution.
So Ferhat, meanwhile, the Turkish warship TCG Kınalı Ada docked at Egypt's Alexandria port earlier this week. Is this another sign of thaw in relations? And could this evolve into some sort of a cooperation between the two countries to solve the Libya crisis?
I think this is significant development, given that for over a decade, the relationship between two regional powers has been complex, and recent significant events, both regional and globally, have prompted to reassess their stances on various matters to align with changing dynamics. And in terms of Libya, and both sides have quite strong influence, and especially Egypt supports Khalifa Haftar's so-called Libyan National Army, and Turkey has been supporting internationally recognized government. And if they reach a kind of consensus, that will have a positive impact on the ground. And even though there is an internal dynamics which alarming in terms of renewing fighting, but as long as those regional powers, they don't support such fighting, and I don't think there is any risk of fighting in the coming days or months.
So Vipi, what do you think? Is there going to be a need to form consensus among major outside players in Libya like Turkiye, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia, or do they all have conflicting interests?
Well, indeed, they have conflicting interests. But immediately after what had happened at the central bank, I mean, here, the kidnapping the IT specialist, the United States Special Envoy to Libya, Richard Norland, issued a statement calling the threats to bank staff is unacceptable because this is halting the operations there. But despite the fact that all these countries you mentioned have conflicting interests in Libya, but I think one thing unites them or should unite them is that the peaceful governing of the country and also making sure that the bank or central bank functioning properly and the other banks in the country functioning properly and the salaries of ordinary Libyans are paid is extremely important. Therefore, we don't expect immediate, as we said, armed clashes, etc. But the tension is not really useful for a country suffered a serious civil war and where it's already, they have this conflict, historic conflict, because as you know, Aisha, Libya was in three parts proposed in 1950 after Second World War, and now that's what they're trying to unite the country. Otherwise, if each and every tribe or the warlord would take it in a different direction, probably we wouldn't see Libya proper in any time soon. But we should also mention here is that the oil revenues are quite significant amount of billions of dollars every year was contributing to people's welfare and their well-being in the country.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.